After e4, d6, d4, and g6, we know we're going to play h4. And in this video we're going to go through something we haven't gone through, which is a really annoying move, h5, just stopping the whole plan that we have seen in the previous videos. So make sure you go check them out before you watch this one. Knight to f3 comes now, and after bishop to g7, basically the black player stops our plan of playing h4, stops our plan from playing f3, g4, h5, and so on. We're going to have to take it in a different way. It's a completely different game now. Bishop to e2, and after c6, the idea of playing b5 and expand on the queen side, especially because now the king side is safe. Doesn't look that safe, but it is. a4 is a crucial move now to play to stop b5. It's important. And after knight to d7, castle. Obviously, there's no point in going up the rook this way because that file is completely closed. So let's look at three options here. We're going to look at them briefly. e5 immediately, or knight f6 or knight h6. Let's start with knight h6. The idea is to plant the knight in g4. White goes on with a5. Castle, and now c3. We have this pawn structure. The center belongs completely to us. And there's not really a move now, except well, knight g4 can happen, but the knight is threatening nothing. The bishop can't develop anywhere. The b5 pawn cannot really push, because then you will be able to take. See, for example, b5 take en passant. Pawn cannot take because it's pinned. The rook will be winning the rook. Queen to b6. Okay, now bishop g5 happens, and of course, if queen takes in b2, your rook isn't really trapped. You can play knight d2. And then you're still threatening to take in e7 with a fork attacking the rook, and this pawn in e5 in d6 is much better position for white than it is for black. Let's make an example. Queen takes. Now obviously we have to play knight d2, and let's see what happens if our opponent takes the rook to e8. In this case, avoiding e7, and black is still up a pawn and is threatening to take another one in c3. Well, white wins because of development. Rook to b1, gives up another pawn, but now queen to a4, threatening the pawn in c6 with an attack on the rook. We have enough attack on b7. The bishop cannot develop in fianchetto. We also will have an attack on d7. The white player anyway is also threatening rook to b3, trapping the rook, the queen. So what does black have to do? Black's only move here, according to the engine, is rook to b8. But even then, the white player is just better, because now rook takes, knight takes back, and now knight to c4. Strangely enough, we don't go and take this pawn with an attack on the knight, extra attack on e7. Knight to c4 is the best move also because we want to be able to move this bishop, right? The dark square bishop, and the bishop in e2 is protecting the knight in c4. Also here we're threatening bishop to d2, which also traps the queen. And here the only move according to the engine for the black player would be obviously bishop takes in d4. But that allows us to take the knight in h6. So in this position, white has just played c3. Let's not look at b5. Well, let's look at e5, which is more thematic move. Here you just take. And here, black can take in two different ways. Let's not look at bishop takes e5, obviously, because it just drops a knight. And there's no compensation. Okay, let's look at knight takes. Okay, here we take back. And again, the bishop cannot take the knight because that just drops a piece. So after pawn takes back, swap the queens, rook takes back, bishop to c4 now. The black player cannot move anything. Knight g4 is the only thing where it threatens nothing. You can play a move like f3 anyway, and then the knight going back to f6 will do nothing. Bishop going to e6, here you can just take and break the pawn structure completely. b5 can never really happen. So let's look at bishop to d7. Okay, bishop to g5 attacks the rook. The pawn is pinned in f7, cannot push. Rook has to go back to e8. Rook to d1 now attacks the bishop. Bishop has to go to e6, but now take. Rook can take back, but we are placing the rook in the 7th rank. Rook in the 7th rank, money in the bank. The pawn is attacked and black can't really push it because then we can take. So rook to b8, f3, solidifying our pawn chain. f6 attacking the bishop, bishop to e3. putting pressure on a7, attacking the rook, and then we will be able to take b7, and we have a very strong pass pawn already. The game is completely compromised. b6 is the best move. And here, if black gets to open the file, he can go to b2, but it doesn't matter. Knight d2 is the best move. Pawn takes in a5 with the idea of activating the pieces. Rook takes. Rook takes in b2. It's too late. Rook a7. We're attacking this bishop, and that's going to be game over. If the bishop goes back, obviously we have a threats of low mower. If bishop goes to f8, you can pin it and then attack this knight. The knight will be trapped. Or you can simply take the knight already, the bishop takes back, and then you check. The bishop blocks, you put more attack over the bishop. I don't know, you figure it out from here. It's very easy endgame. And in this position, earlier we went through bishop to d7 because there's not much to do. Let's look at this move so we understand how to take it. Knight g4, it does nothing because f3, knight f6, bishop to g5, pins the knight. And that bishop can never be removed from there. So let's look at rook to d6 now. Idea of doubling up the, maybe developing the bishop, doubling up the rook somehow. Okay, knight d2, and after bishop finally develops to the only possible square, take. Take back in order to smash the pawn structure, rook f to d1. And now after knight to h7, attacking our bishop, bishop back to a3. So you know how to play this game. Rook come back to d6, knight to c4, just wins for the white player. The black player cannot double up the rooks because we have an attack on the rook immediately. The rook cannot go anywhere, so the rook will have to take us. And after rook takes back, our opponent cannot stop our infiltration into the 7th rank. Also our attack on a7, the knight in d6 with attack on b7 and f7. It's completely over. So let's go from the start and let's look at another variation. g6, h4, h5, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2, c6, play a4, very important, knight to d7, castle, and now earlier we're still looking at knight h6, a5, castle, c3, and now e5. So we saw we're going to take the pawn. We saw what happens after knight takes, all the swaps and so on. Let's see what happens after the pawn takes. Okay, b4 comes now. The idea is to play a6. We have double attack over a6, and we just go and put the rook on an open file. Let's see, for instance, this move, f5, trying to gain some attack in the center, some development as well, because black cannot develop the knight anywhere. Knight f6 will give a similar scenario to before. This bishop is completely smothered. So let's look at this move, f4 with the idea of activating the rook. I mean f5. Okay, a6 comes. And when the pawn takes, right, you can take back. And then take, you have a rook on an open file. If it doesn't take you, you have now, our opponent has an isolated pawn in c6. Let's look at this move, for instance, pawn takes e4. Okay, knight g5. You also have square e6 available. You're also threatening to go to e4 with the knight. Knight to f6, stopping the knight from going to e6 potentially. Okay, taking in b7. Bishop takes back, and now knight e6 becomes accessible. Okay, queen has to take here, obviously. So when the rook takes back, now the rook will have to move. Obviously, rook e8 is not possible because knight c7 wins material with no compensation. Rook f7 is not much better because of bishop to c4. Threatening to play knight c5, attacking the bishop, pinning the rook. Best move will be king h8, but that doesn't help. Knight takes g7, and that's it. If the rook takes, in order to escape the attack of this bishop, then bishop takes knight for free. If the king takes, let's say king g7, then again you have an attack on this knight, check, and you also win the rook. So that's even worse. Which brings us back to the initial position so that we can see something new. Knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2, c6, a4, knight d7, castle. So earlier we've been going through knight h6. Now let's change. Let's go through the immediate e5. Okay, no problem. Take. And now let's remember that taking with the bishop is bad because after you take, with a knight. The opponent is depriving himself of the strong fianchetted bishop, and the dark squares around the king will be terrible, and also castling queenside will be unsafe. So let's go with knight takes, for instance. Okay, take. And after bishop takes, it looks like in this variation, black managed to escape all the trouble of swapping queens and give us better activity. Okay, bishop to g5, attacking the queen. Now here the queen should have to move. Obviously an idea like f6 is not good, because then this bishop remains, again, the dark squares around the king side are now no longer protected, at least not as good, and the king has got nowhere good to castle. Bishop to e3 comes now. The threat is f4 trapping the bishop, so knight to e7 for instance, f4 wins the bishop. So black will have to play, let's say, d5, best move. Okay, take, and after queen takes, knight to d2. Now it looks like development is now possible, but still, the game is better now for white. We're gonna exploit this very weak king. The opponent king cannot castle, because obviously we put the knight in d2, bishop c4 will be pinning the queen to the king. So that's not possible. Let's see, a move like knight to f5. Still, bishop to c4, too good. Queen to d6 goes into the same pattern. f4 wins material. The bishop cannot take, because otherwise bishop takes back comes with a check, and it's completely over. So obviously this move wins the bishop. If the queen goes all the way to d8 instead of d6, still bishop f4 is a very strong move. You also can put more attack with knight f3. So that's going to be it. So in this position, f6 is not recommendable. Let's look at queen to b6, attacking this pawn, developing the piece. Looks like it makes more sense. Knight to d2, ignoring that. Okay. So we have seen what happens when the queen goes too far. Obviously, bishop to b2 would be really bad, because you can pin the bishop. Queen to b2, knight c4 would be a very strong move. So let's look at this one. Bishop to e6. Okay, knight f3, attacking the bishop. And we should be able to take the bishop with a strong attack. Our opponent can never stop our bishop from attacking d8, not in a good way at least. And if we take this, pawn takes back. It's a fantastic position. Black can never develop the knight without allowing us to enter this side with bishop to f6. Let's look at this idea, bishop to b2. Does this work? Because you might wonder, okay, rook b1, we're pinning the bishop, right? But now black can just play bishop a2. What's going to happen now? Okay, queen takes d6, ignoring what's happening to the rook, because we're developing. So let's say bishop takes rook. Very quietly, take back. Still pinning. You're done the exchange. But here is big trouble for our opponent. We also have an idea of playing knight e5, but let's see how it goes. We threaten the bishop in there. If black plays c5, for example, right, we could do bishop b5, game over. If black moves the knight anywhere, then queen e7 becomes checkmate. The best move according to the engine is rook to d8, but you are attacking with the bishop, and when the piece gets taken back, then you can take the bishop and you're going to be up material. If white were to play again in this exact position, the plan will be here, c3, very cheeky move that cuts off the bishop from the rest of the game, and we are planning to play bishop to c4 with the idea of bishop f7, knight e5, and a checkmate to come in few moves. So in this position, let's see what happens after f6. Too late, check. Obviously the king moving to d8 loses immediately with rook to d1. Checkmate very soon. If the king goes to... Well, let's make it clear, by the way, knight e7 obviously doesn't work, because you can simply take the bishop. The bishop can't take back, because then the rook has an attack on the rook, and then the bishop will also be attacking in b2. So knight e7 is not possible. King to f8 in this position is met with rook takes b2. And now there's an attack on the queen. So when the queen takes, bishop c4, and is threatening an attack on f7, this is now unstoppable. Black's check are useless. Last recap before we close this video. h4, h5, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2, c6, a4, very important move, knight to d7, castle, and now we're going to look at the move we haven't looked at, knight g2, f6, the one that looks the most normal. Okay, e5 comes right now from white. And now it's not recommendable for black to take, because then after take back, the knight will still go to g4. We're going to look at that move. You might wonder, the knight might go to d5. In that case, white plays e6. And that's the move that's going to happen now. So let's look at how it works. It's not like black is like, it's not like white is completely winning or anything, of course. But we're going to look at this line from this perspective. So after e5, what happens after knight to g4? e6 comes anyway, this is thematic. And after pawn takes, knight to g5. You have now attack over e6, you have double attack over the knight in g4. So after the knight moves, allowing the bishop to defend that square. Queen to d3, capitalizing on g6. It will be fantastic to get to that square. Rook h6 is just not good, it doesn't work, simply because f3 traps the knight. So that's not possible for black to do that. The best move here will be castle, ignoring that. And now we're just going to take this pawn. This is a computer move, castling. Queen to e8, looking for a trade in an excellent position for white. So of course we're going to deny it. Queen to d3. And now we keep this unbelievable position. Black doesn't have any way to ever become active, to make the pieces active. This pressure over h7 is tremendous. The knight can never move from f6. Let's start from this example, e5 now, the idea of developing this bishop maybe, or especially trade a few pawns in the center and open the files and start the game. Here you take this knight. The knight cannot take back, obviously, because queen h7. So pawn takes back, and now pawn takes the pawn. And when the pawn takes back, knight to c3. See how bad the pawn structure is for our opponent. Queen to h5 attacking this pawn, simply play g3, you're completely safe. And now there's just nothing to do. Bishop f5 will be taken. Knight d5, you're two attackers. There are no moves for our opponent. Maybe trying to trade our unbelievable knight by going to h7, asking a question to our knight. See what you want to do. You just play knight to e4, and you're going to keep knight in g5. It's extremely good for white. Black has two sets of isolated pawns, but one of them is alone. But anyway, let's look at this move. Knight to d7. Idea of going to c5 maybe. Okay, a5. And obviously I forgot to mention knight to c5 is not good, because then you have a check. So let's go now through rook to b8. These are all now computer moves, but still bishop to e3, familiarizing with the patterns, right? You're looking at this move, you'll be able to find it each time that it occurs. b6, take, rook a7. And that's it, the infiltration has occurred. We have double attack over this. So when the knight moves, you have an attack here. The position is falling apart for black. And in this position, a move like d5 obviously doesn't do much. So I mean, you just play knight to c3, c5 maybe with the idea of opening the files. Take, bishop to d7, bishop to f4, rook to c8, going for this pawn. Surprisingly, the best move now is not b4. Not very surprisingly, because I haven't looked at this position personally, but I think knight e4 looks like a really good move here. Too much attack, so we can't allow that to happen. Rook a2 e1 is the best move, moving the rook from that very dangerous diagonal. However, rook c5 seems to be possible now. Okay, bishop h3 is the best move. Now we're allowing double attack over e6. So queen to c8, is this now possible? No, now we take this knight. Remember, this knight cannot take because of the consistent threat because of the consistent threat on h7. Remember, this is the variation that our opponent plays f7 pawn, g6 and h5. This is what black wanted. It allowed us, it stopped our h4, h5 repertoire plan that we have, but he also now allowed us to put the knight in g5 forever. So after pawn takes back, bishop to e5. The idea is to remove the knight so we can go to h7. And there's no coming back here. I mean, let's say maybe knight to e4. Does it stop everything? Well, no, because you take the bishop. King takes back. Take the knight. Pawn takes. Rook takes. Black has this isolated pawn. We're ready to go to g4. I mean, what can black possibly do here? e5 maybe. Protects the pawn with the bishop. b4 attacking the rook. And when we take this pawn in e5, it's going to be game over. Rook to c3 attacking our queen. Queen to d5. We have now finalizing the attack over e5. We're completely winning. And in this position, instead of knight e4, what happens if rook to f7? This may be an extreme move, giving up the exchange in order to not get checkmated. Anyway, knight e2 is the best move. King to f8 doesn't help, simply because of queen g6. So you see how you're easily infiltrating. Queen here has to protect the rook, but look at this king. It's not going to last. Knight to f4 comes now. Threatening to go to h5. And look also how much attack we have over e6. So after rook to c6, putting more defense over e6. Best move here is h5. This is the most accurate. Threatening to go to h6. Knight takes. Knight check. King has the move. Now knight here. I mean, it's a joke. The whole game is a joke. It's an humiliation.